Hey everybody, welcome to the Tech Founder Show. It's Tony Zayas, joined by my co-host Andy Halko. And here we're on this show where we talk to people who are at the bleeding edge of technology, just, coming out with amazing innovations, hearing all about kind of where it came from and the story behind it. So Andy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How about yourself, Tony?
Doing good.
So tell us a little bit about who we're talking to today.
Yeah, so today's guest is Dr. Benjamin Schmidt. He's the CEO and co-founder of RoadBotics. RoadBotics helps construct digital twins with visual data that's mapped for collaboration, engagement, and evaluation. Using the power of artificial intelligence, these interactive maps empower you to make data-driven decisions about your environment, whether it's in a large city, small community, or project site. So some super cool stuff here.
Yeah, my mind's a little bit.
Yeah,
can't
for
wait
sure.
to hear more. My mind's blown by that description. So,
how are you doing, Ben?
I'm doing very well. How about you guys?
Real good, thank you. So I obviously read the description, but would love to hear, your take. How do you explain, what it is RoadBotics does?
Absolutely. RoadBotics is really helping, as you mentioned, sort of in this digital twin environment. We started out working primarily with municipal governments, so think like smaller kind of local cities, local towns, things like that. And then also work a lot with like civil engineering and construction firms. And one of the things that you run into when working in sort of this infrastructure environment is, it seems like a duh, but it's massive, right? There's tons and tons and tons of things, right? Bridges, roads, street lights, traffic lights, right? There's lots and lots of stuff. And unfortunately, kind of the state of the art right now is, pen and paper. It's jump in a truck, it's go around. And so like the idea of like digitizing that information at scale is still a very new concept. It's where our company sort of works right now at that bleeding edge of, how do we automatically identify, automatically assess what's going on in the world, and then use that information so that a government official, a civil engineer, can make better decisions about how to manage and maintain what they've got, right? That's how we're going to get better infrastructures, better management, better maintenance.
Wow. So
And he just
the origin story. Where'd you start at, and how'd you get here?
I'm sorry, Andy. I think you cut out for a little bit. What was the question?
So I want to hear the origin story. How it started and how'd you get into this?
It's a good question. So yeah, the company is about 4.5 years old. We're coming up on our 5-year anniversary. We're actually a spin out of Carnegie Mellon University. We're based in Pittsburgh. Whatever that means, this new like digital first thing, based loosely in Pittsburgh. And really, it was one of my co-founders, actually. It was his original idea of, he started out with mounting a cell phone in a windshield of a car and driving around and collecting video data effectively. And the first application, which we still do today, hence our name, was looking at pavement distresses, so like things like potholes and cracks. And since then, we sort of expanded the AI's capability to look at signage, traffic lights, all sorts of different kinds of infrastructure. So that's really where we started, was on pavement surfaces, and then quickly broadened as we sort of realized there's this much larger infrastructure world out there that sort of needs the help of this kind of technology.
And where did you guys, like early on, where did you identify that there was this market opportunity for, what you had envisioned?
I almost feel like the coy answer is, I'm a driver and I hit potholes.
Yeah.
They suck. That's kind of the glib version of it, which is,
yeah.
I think we all sort of know infrastructure has challenges. I think it's the most common refrain, I think when you used to go to parties or like barbecues and stuff, what a wonderful time that was. I tell someone like, hey, this is what I do for a living. And they're like, oh, you need to come to my town. You need to come to my city's roads are the worst, right? I think every single person in the world, if you ask them, what's going on with your town, they'll be like, it's the worst. We have the worst roads. Like, okay, everyone says that. It's not necessarily untrue. It's just hard to gauge. But that's certainly where kind of it started. Is there's a need for it. But I think definitively, more in the sort of like startup space of kind of iterate and all the lean methodology, MVPs kind of thing. Certainly where my co-founder Christoph, what his idea of using that smartphone collecting video data. The first application was certainly on the roads, but we started to look at like what are the other ones, right? Could we find and detect signs and sort of localize them within the world? We certainly focused heavily for our first few years on pavement because that's where we got the big response, right? Massive dollars go into management of roads. It's a big budget item for even like a small town. And so focusing there sort of made the most sense in sort of chasing dollars and activity from a business perspective. But as we sort of, as I said, kind of advance that technology, the applications are really limitless in sort of understanding the built environment. And so we started to get smarter and smarter about there are other kinds of stakeholders that might care about the water system or, utility poles and things. And so from that, we've sort of branched out into other verticals beyond just the government into these other spaces and sort of kept going. But that's kind of, the origin of how we got from, potholes to where we are today.
I'd love to dig into that a little bit more. A lot in this show, a lot of people talk about minimum viable products. For you, you talk about the cell phone and going around taking pictures. What did it start looking like out from there? Was it, still a very manual process, or were you able to get into technology quickly and scale it? What did it look like as you started to build it?
Sure. So yes, we similar. We're on the same train of lean methodology. So our first MVP we had within like a few months of our founding. Lots of development went into it, but basically the first steps were moving from video, think like dash cam, and sort of processing that down into images in space, right? Which is not really a trivial problem, but pulling out individual frames every so many meters, so many feet, and then running those through an AI algorithm. So we had kind of two, and we continued to have really two parallel like technical development tracks, right? You can almost think of them as like separate MVPs that join together into like the final offering for the client. One track is the actual machine vision, right? So here's an image of, a dash cam image looking out over the hood of a vehicle. What do you see in it, right? That's the first question. And I apologize. Modern world. The other side of it is mapping. The other side is the mapping, right? So, okay, now that you've seen something or where the image came from, where is it, right? Is it 100 meters away? Is it 5 meters away? Can you localize that object within space? Developing those two things was sort of the most critical sort of baby stepping to ultimately a solution, which is, hey, I'm the head of public works for a municipal government, a small town. I have a $500,000 budget. Where do I spend it? If you can solve those sort of two technical problems, you can then jump into solving the client's problem, which is this road's in good condition, this one's in bad condition, this one, might be teetering on the edge, and I could probably do a little bit there. And that's really how we sort of finalize the MVP of we need to make the technical progress, mapping and AI, so that we could ultimately solve that client problem of like, where do I put my budget dollars to get the biggest bang for my buck?
So what did it take to get over those technical humps? Like, did you need to bring in outside consultants? Are you and your co-founder very, very technical? For a layman, how do you then go from that space of like, we're taking pictures, the AI that's helping make good decisions?
So it was not outside consultants. It was all us. So we have been actually very fortunate. So this is not my first startup. The company I was at before, actually several of the people there now work here, which made sort of getting started incredibly fast, right? Like, okay, well, you're going to work on that part, right? Yeah, I got this. Okay. So we did a lot of like the engineering work that way. There's a lot of iteration, and we're talking like 4.5 years ago. So I think the state of, machine learning, deep learning now is even significantly better than it was then. But yeah, we were buying, NVIDIA Titans at the time and trying to train algorithms. And then the other, again, one of the problems, I guess, or sort of challenge, let's call it a challenge with doing things in the physical world is we spent a lot of time in the car collecting data and then sort of coming back to the office and being like, that didn't work. I have, many of my colleagues will remember we spent one Memorial Day weekend trying to collect an entire town's worth of data, only to realize that my mistake, I forgot I commented out the line that had the GPS being recorded. So we had tons of video, but we had no idea where it was. So we had to go do it again. So lots of dumb mistakes.
Which is commonplace for any startup, right?
Absolutely. Comes with the territory. What's experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. So I got tons of experience. Tons.
So beyond that, Ben, I'd like to hear, I think I saw, in your LinkedIn profile, you've, an interesting background as, from researcher, data scientist, CTO, at the last startup you had. So just love to hear a little bit about that backstory.
Sure. So yes, it's been an interesting journey. I think certainly chasing interesting problems is probably the most common theme in it. But yeah, I have a PhD in bioengineering, so I did a lot of brain imaging studies. As I said, the company, before this one, but right after grad school, was actually in the energy markets. So we were helping wind turbines to basically operate within power markets most optimally by sort of predicting different components of what was happening. And then now here I am in sort of a very infrastructure, civil engineering kind of market environment. So I would definitely say underlying all of it is this theme of sort of advanced technology and kind of interesting fields that I would hope can make an impact. I think that's been maybe a theme here is I want to do something that really matters. There's lots and lots of really cool technology. And to me, one of the most kind of interesting things when you look across it is you can make incredibly fast strides in many industries by sort of borrowing from one's most advanced technology and applying it into a domain that maybe doesn't know about that sort of innovation. And I like to think that's really what we're doing here is sort of borrowing from a lot of other kind of machine vision, localization, mapping, kind of things you'd see in a robotics company, things you'd see in AVs, borrowing that same technology and then applying it for helping governments make decisions, help civil engineers to build and manage better. I think that's certainly at least the theme I draw from my own background is trying to find those kinds of opportunities to translate from one to the next.
I'd like to hear a little bit about some of the challenges that might have existed. You said, you're working in a space that a lot of pen and paper, right? People do things in a very non-technical fashion. And here you are with, a solution that is AI, machine learning, very cutting edge as far as what you're doing. What were some of the roadblocks or hurdles that you had to overcome to, get in with government officials, civil engineers who weren't used to this type of thing?
Lots. I would say that very much there's a lot of reception to using and sort of adopting newer innovations. I think everybody sort of wants that. The hard part is, where the rubber meets the road. By the way, there are tons of road puns, so it's super fun. Like roadblocks, rubber meets the road. It's great. Very fun industry to be in. The biggest one here is sort of it comes down to trust, right? So you're trying to create an algorithm. If you start almost at the beginning, you've got pen and paper. Why do you have pen and paper? Right? It's because you're taking small amounts of notes over very large geographic things. So think about infrastructure for even a small town, like a small suburban town. Go 45 minutes outside of any U.S. city, any city in the world. You have small towns. There's lots and lots of them. But even they have a ton of infrastructure, like maybe 100 miles of roads. They have sidewalks that might be dozens or maybe 100 miles of sidewalk. How do you sort of keep track and manage all that? So pen and paper works as a way to record it. Now the technological shift is you could certainly go and collect video data on all of that. That's easy. except then what you're left with is hours and hours of video data, gigabytes, maybe even terabytes of information on it, but no way to organize it, right? So like the technology is there, but it can't be unlocked. And to me, that's the AI sort of centric component of it is you don't actually want to look at all the infrastructure. That's not helpful. What you want to do is focus on the places that you're supposed to focus on, where there's issues, where things are arising that are unexpected. That's what the AI can sort of do. And so the biggest challenge with that, thinking about sort of adopting our kind of technology, going from pen and paper to sort of what we're talking about, it was somewhat understanding that kind of progression, right? That we're going to help almost triage, right? It's like here's where to focus, here's not where to not focus. It's also then trusting that triage process works. Now, again, one of the huge benefits that we get is that it's very easy to verify, right? So it's, I always feel like it's a kind of one of those NP complete problems, right? Solving the triage problem is super hard, but it's very easy to verify because you can just go look at all the data and say like, oh yeah, you are correct. So having that sort of dual mode was always something that we found very helpful, which is we'll give you all of that video data that you can't look through all of it, and we'll focus the areas on where you need to pay attention. And if you ever wish to actually check, you can go look through all of it and verify it, right? So like we can stand by the promise. And that makes that trust barrier lower significantly, which makes it easier to adopt and move forward. So that, I think trust is always for any innovation is the biggest sort of question. Can you get the new process to work is really, can you get people to trust the new process works better?
And how did you get your first couple of clients on? What was the approach to having them trust something that's brand new?
Lots of meetings. That was definitely it. Lots of meetings, lots of demos, lots of iterations. I think that's probably the shortest answer. The reality is, we spent a lot of time in kind of Western Pennsylvania, driving from one town after another to sort of showcase what it is that we did. I think very much in the bringing up lean startup, if you want to do the crossing the chasm kind of thing, there are definitely the early adopters in every market. Government is included. There are the people who want to jump on that bandwagon. And so finding those is kind of the first search problem that you have. Identify those, showcase it, prove it, they'll adopt it, and then hopefully become your sort of use cases for the next ones. But I think that's really what it came down to. It was just kind of boots on the ground, making those kinds of things, iterating, showing that feedback is accepted, right? So there would be, especially at our early days, there would be one of our kind of now infamous first screw ups was that our algorithm was not very good at, or we had done most of our training in the summer, I think it was, and then come fall, we started collecting new data, but there were leaves all over the ground. And the algorithm started thinking those were cracks and bad. And so it started rating them poorly. That was a whole sort of like, oh gosh, all right, now we have to go back to the drawing board. The client points out that like, what are you doing here? Like this road is fine. And trying to create that sort of virtuous cycle of both trust, but also iteration on our product development to make sure that we're solving those problems. So all of that, it's really, we didn't do it once and we were finished. It was try, okay, try again, okay, try again, okay, try again. Years later, we can now say that like, we really do have it. We have our process, we have our system verified by lots and lots and lots of mistakes.
And I will share, I grew up in Pittsburgh most of my life. So okay. I'm a Pittsburgh boy at heart. I would love to talk about AI because this is a tech show and we really like to dig into the tech. Where is it right now and where is it going from your perspective?
Oh, that's a very big question.
It is.
So I can, I guess, again, we have sort of two parallel tracks of how we sort of think about AI. I don't know if this is sort of the normal flavor, but it's how we at least think about it. We have the machine vision part, here's an image, extract, put bounding boxes on it, semantic segmentations, etc. Like pull the things that are meaningful out of the image. And then we have the other side, which is that localization problem. So, not usually in a single photo, but like in a video, we can do some of the simultaneous localization and mapping and try to auto find where is the camera perspective inside there. I would definitely say on both dimensions, thinking about our own sort of R&D efforts, the big entities continue to make huge strides and then open source them happily. That benefits kind of all of us smaller companies that can't field a $100 million research and development team. So I think that's a huge source of it. So in some ways, we're sort of beholden to them on what their most, their latest model development is. That said, that's kind of the like, oh no, what is Google and Facebook doing? And, will they one day shut off the tap? I'm less worried about that problem when it comes to sort of AI overall. The one that's way more interesting to me is application is still incredibly, incredibly hard to get right. So you can have like state-of-the-art AIs, but actually getting the application right is the hardest part. How do you deliver it? How do you distill whatever's coming out of the algorithm into something that the client cares about? My belief is that you're more likely to sort of die as a startup on that application problem than you are worrying about what the next R&D problem is. I apologize. I'm going to mute myself for a second.
No big deal. AI is very interesting to me. I keep wanting to talk to people about where it's headed and how is it going to change the world, because we are making these very quick strides that are just changing things really fast. And so, for someone like you that's like really tapped into it, I mean, you kind of have a viewpoint that I think most people that are either touching tech a little bit don't have, or especially for people that don't know anything about it.
Absolutely. Well, so I think maybe I would answer it in two parts. I think in the long arc, I totally agree with you. I think AI has some massive potential to sort of change and shake up things, change the way that we do business, all that kind of stuff. It's not the cool, exciting answer that you'd sort of read about all the time, but really most of the challenge, I think, I would imagine, in talking to like other founders, most of the real challenge here is not getting your AI right. That's the necessary but not sufficient condition, right? You can do all that. You can make some cool AI. You can have it do all sorts of things. But if you cannot find a product or you can't find someone that buys it, it's all useless, right? We used to have a joke that like, we could build a model that sort of predicts how many sodas are in the fridge right now, but who cares, right? Like, you could be the most advanced model in the world. You could run sort of, massive deep nets. You could train it for weeks. You could have it on thousands of CPUs. It could be state of the art. Who cares, right? It'll have no meaningful impact on the world. And I think to me that finding that point in between is what's so hard as entrepreneurs is, we get sucked into the lure, the excitement, the like, oh my gosh,
right.
The next data set, they passed this, they solved this problem. Like, incredible. Who's going to buy it? How am I going to get it out into the market? Can I actually put it in a form that's digestible? And does it solve anyone's actual problem? Like, that leap is still so huge that, I think that's where we're all going to live and die, is on sort of translating it. And this is often to the theoretical, but I think about it in reverse. Okay, imagine tomorrow they come out with an AI that has human level intellect. Terrific. I still have the same problem with I have human beings that work at RoadBotics. I'm a human being. We work at RoadBotics. Our problem is to figure out what our clients want, right? So, even if we have human level AI, we still need to find something that people want. And then deliver it in a way that makes sense. So I'm super bullish on sort of what the prospects are. I think some of the newer deep learning tech, even some of these like reinforcement concepts that are starting to become more and more popular, like the playing Atari and all that kind of stuff. very cool. Yeah, again, I think like take our industry infrastructure. How do you apply it? How do you make that worthwhile? How do you help governments? How do you help municipalities? That's the main game.
So just to dig into that a little bit, how did you and RoadBotics, how did you guys go about the process of addressing that application problem? And how do you make that, compelling case to that target audience so you can translate that value of what you guys could do, allow them to see, what that would mean to them? Because again, it's so different than what they've been doing. How did you guys go about that process?
Well, we certainly didn't get it right at first. I'd argue we might not still have it right yet, but we're going to get closer and closer. Very much iterative. I think everything we're talking about, it's all iteration, right? We try one, we see how it goes. I think the disingenuous version would be, we're throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. I'd like to think we're a little bit more advanced than that, but on my pessimistic days, I don't think we're that much more advanced than that. It's just how fast you can throw spaghetti at the wall. So that I think is very much how to find that iteration loop that kind of creates the, you get feedback from the client. That's the most important thing. If you don't have any feedback, it's useless, right? If you're just throwing product over the wall and then not paying attention, you can't iterate. So getting feedback, that's a huge part of it. I mean, we have a whole team that's just dedicated to that, right? Which is, what do the customers think? How are they using it? What do they like? What don't they like? What, do they ever press that button? That kind of stuff. So that's a big part in kind of finding that, product market fit, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I think iteration, it's all about iteration.
So just to learn a little bit more about, your co-founder as well, you guys are both technical founders, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Did you find that, part of the challenge was you guys are very technical, you're into this solution, into the weeds, developing this thing out. Was part of it, how do we convey that message to that audience, create something that really resonates with them?
Yeah, I'm not arrogant enough to think that I would say that, no, that was easy. The part I would say is that, so our previous company, Quantera, I think probably the lesson we took away, especially when it comes to sort of selling advanced technology, is don't sell advanced technology, right? And yes, I have a technical background. I'm very technical by nature. It pains me to think that this is actually how the world operates sometimes, but it is definitely how the world operates. No one wants to buy your AI solution. Nobody's going to be like, excellent, it has AI, I will purchase it, right? Like maybe a few, maybe some, really crazy tech people, or if you're directly selling AI, that's what you're selling. Caveats there. But for most, we do not walk into a government and say like, hello, you should buy us because we have AI, right? Like that's not, you should buy us because we solve your problem. That's it. How do we solve it? We use AI, we use a whole bunch of technology. That's what makes it bigger, better, faster. That's the why. But you're not going to buy it because of the why. You're going to buy it because of what we can do. And I think to me, that's one of the lessons that definitely has taken a long time to learn, but certainly at RoadBotics, we applied it, I think, reasonably well. We always get caught in the trap every once in a while, but we use AI to solve problems. But the problem we're trying to solve is you, dear client, need to manage your infrastructure, and we make that easier. If you want, I can talk to you all about how we do it. But for most people, for most sort of like heads of organizations, people with sort of buying authority, whatever you want to call, in sort of your sales organizations, that's what they want to know. Are you going to save me money? Are you going to make me money? And can I rely on you to do the two things, one of those two things you said? Great, terrific. So focus there. That's the message. So, I think even for RoadBotics, I think, we have some really cool technology. We've done some amazing things with that. But when we are sitting down with the government, we are talking about potholes and fatigue cracking and signage inventories and, can we get water reports going and how are we going to talk to, counsel and unlock grant funding. That's what they care about, right? So that's what we focus on. So that is definitely, at least the lesson we've taken away from it is we're not selling technology. We're selling the solution to your problem.
So you talked about the application side of it being really a challenge. So how did you face that of taking information that you created and then building a way to really deliver it to your client base? You know, how did you look at that from of trying to create a solution from that perspective?
That's a good one. I think it's a misattributed quote, but I like it anyway. If Henry Ford had asked people what they wanted, he would have said faster, or they would have said faster horses. I think very much the hardest part with trying to find those things is that, we talk to a lot of clients. We continue to talk to a lot of clients, but no one is ever going to tell you, like, this is exactly what it is that I need. They're going to get close. They're going to tell you, like, where their pain points are. They'll probably do it indirectly, but human beings just sort of suck at telling you, like, this, if you build this exact thing, this is exactly how, like, no, that's our job. That translation is probably the hardest part, and we've gotten burnt by it before. We've been successful with it before, but yeah, if you give me this, I will buy this. That should always set off alarm bells for every entrepreneur. Like, I don't think that's true. I really don't think that's true. I think that's what you want to happen,
yeah.
But I don't know that that's really what's going to, but if I put this in front of you, this solved the problem. Trying to find that is really, I think, that's the whole problem as entrepreneurs, is that search problem. Here's what the feedback that I have. I can't 100% say, like, that's exactly what I need to do. That's not my roadmap, right? Like, you have to have your own sort of view. One of the things that, it's just because of who we are, so I'll call it a benefit, but it could certainly be a detriment. We are not civil engineers, right? I'm not a civil engineer, right? So we're working in a space that we work a lot with civil engineers, public works officials, but we don't come from that space, which does give us, I think, sort of a unique perspective on it, in that we are trying to learn especially at the beginning, we're trying to learn the industry while also trying to identify, what should we do to help, and go back and forth. I've talked to other people about this, of sort of like which way it works, but you have this sort of, I've been in this industry for 10 years and I know exactly what we can do to improve it. And then you have kind of our version of it, which is we've never been in this industry and we're looking at it from an outside perspective, knowing a whole bunch about, like, what's possible in other industries. I don't know which is better, but certainly the path that we've been on is that second one, which is, okay, so wait, how do you do that? Like, oh, that's what you mean when you say, well, okay, like, here's the new vocab you're talking about. And then that starts to get our own sort of, like, iteration on, like, actually over in this industry, this is how they do it. Like, what if I gave you this? And, like, that would solve it. And, like, nice. So that both unique take and, again, iteration, I think is very helpful in trying to find that right answer.
Yeah. So since you've done multiple startups or been involved in them, what's your viewpoint on bootstrapping versus raising capital?
Oh man, that seems like a setup. So I mean, for us, we did bootstrap for the first, like, 8 months, which came with quite a lot of pain. So we did that, and then we did get our first fundraising. We are now today venture backed.
Okay.
Ultimately, I think it depends on sort of how big your market is, what your capital costs, all the usual, like, business pieces of it. But at the end of the day, how do I phrase this correctly? Because I've run into this a lot. I think people who are inclined for bootstrapping and then look at sort of the venture capital model come in with this view that, like, venture capitalists are going to force them to do all this, like, on a day-to-day basis, that is just not true. Venture capitalists are also people. They want all of us to be successful. They know we're human beings. They're human, like, we're all trying to build something and accelerate it quickly. yes, their business model is assuming that like 1 in 10 work, et cetera, et cetera. But they're not cold and callous about it, right? Like it's just, that's how it is, right? We're going to try to scale this thing. I think the biggest one is just going in eyes wide open of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, right? If you want to raise several $1 million and staff up and try to hire and go on this like massive growth trajectory, that's venture capital. Unless you have a lot of money, you're not bootstrapping that kind of company. The flip of that is, yeah, you can, bootstrapping does work. You can grow companies that way. There's nothing to sort of preclude it. But I don't think necessarily like one is better than the other. It's really just a matter of like, what's your trajectory look like, right? Are you going for a rocket ship, and it's a rocket, it either goes to space or you're dead. There's no in between, there's no exit. Or you're trying to do sort of the slow and steady, but you might never get to space, but you'd at least be airborne. Don't know. That's, I think, for everyone to judge for themselves, but pros and cons on each dimension. I don't think it's necessarily like.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've had, right, and we've had founders on both sides of the coin, but I think you're right. I mean, it's always a very specific case. But there's a lot of founders that you always hear sitting there on the fence and saying, how do I approach this? Do I want to try and just like grind it out? Or do I want to, spend my full life trying to pitch folks to give me money? So
exactly. But yeah, and this is the other, I mean, certainly on that last comment, this is another one that I hear a lot of, like, and then you have to try to raise again. It's like you're always raising, whether you're bootstrapping or not. It's just whether your customers are the ones funding it or whether the investors are the ones funding it. We never stop selling, right? I feel like I'm just giving quotes all the time, but one of my other favorite ones is the higher up you go in an organization, the more every role looks like sales. I can definitively tell you that is 100% true. Like, absolutely, every single day is selling. It could be a venture capitalist, it could be a partnership, it could be a client. You're always selling. It just depends on which thing. Could it be product? Could it be the company itself? Always selling.
I love that.
Yeah. So, Ben, just to shift gears a little bit, what does the team at RoadBotics look like?
Good question. So I think we're at like about 30 employees right now. And yeah, I think we've got the usual sort of grouping of individuals you'd see at a startup. So we have a sales team, we've got marketing, our engineering teams, kind of a R&D group. But the one that's a little bit unique, given some of what we do, is really we have a decently sized services department. So we're in kind of this, I don't know what it is, but like a limbo-ish state where, we use a lot of AI, but we absolutely have to be right. So we do a lot of like quality control. This is something we learned very early in our process. About, machines do most of the work, but we still need someone to make sure that it doesn't do anything crazy. The reason being that, as I said, hundreds of thousands of dollars are being sort of decided upon what we're doing. So being wrong has really bad consequences. But if that's kind of what you meant, I mean, that's the usual sort of breakdown here of sort of how we've positioned ourselves. It's ebbed and flowed on like head counts in each department, and sort of, some grow faster than others. But, again, I think we have an outstanding team. It's one of the reasons that we've been successful.
Yeah. And along those lines, do you have any advice that you have for hiring? How do you find the right people for your organization? And what would be, just a nugget just that you've learned over the years that you would pass along as a little bit of advice about finding good people, finding the right fit?
A nugget of advice. I have no idea. Hiring is hard. Hiring is the hardest thing ever. I mean, all of your success will come from the people that you pick. So again, I think like taking lessons as a technical founder, right? Your product, your company, your technology, they're largely irrelevant if you have bad people, right? Or at least, not the right people. Not to say people are bad or something like that, just not the right fit. It will really come down to people. It's all people. So I think when it comes to hiring, lots of different philosophies. We've made tons of mistakes. We've made tons of successes. I think some of it is really that I think others talk about it as like a gut feel. I think just over time you get enough experience with it and you start to feel like, this is going to work, this is not. But you never really know. And, the other part here is I think we've all experienced this over the last 18 months is people are people. They're complicated. Other things can happen. Life events can happen. You're never really quite sure of what happens next. But I think that's just part of the journey that all the startups go on is hiring people, retaining people, keeping it exciting. And, very much I'd like to think, trying not to burn bridges and things like that. You never know. Especially, for us, like in a Pittsburgh area, it's a small community, and we all do, we move from startup to startup. So, going to see all these folks again.
How about your role in the company? For a founder and founders that might watch this, how has your role changed from like day one to now? And how do you see that evolution of a founder over time?
Yeah, man, I don't know. That'd take like almost 5 years to explain, I think. I don't know. It always feels like a roller coaster.
Just use a quote.
Yeah, there you go. I'll have to think of one. I'm all out of my fresh ones. So I gotta think of one. I think, how has it changed? Certainly it's in the beginning, you're every role. Towards the end, it's more like, hopscotching around from role to role. I think that's, at least the one I can most imagine. I think a lot of the like internal growing pains that we've gone through is like, okay, this job is, this person and they have multiple jobs. And then you start to like sever those and break them apart. It's like, now this person's responsible for this part and this part because they're each now too big. I think those are a lot of the like day-to-day or as things progressed, jumping from every problem to like, okay, now we have people who are experts at that. I'm like, great, I'm not. I'm going to go over here. Mm-hmm. That's super helpful. Always love that. Hire for that. That's always a good idea. I think that's probably the biggest change. But I would definitely say the roller coaster always exists. You're always going up and down. One moment you're on the top of the world and everything's winning, and then the next moment it's like, oh my gosh, it's all crashed. The difference is, as the organization gets bigger, it's like the roller coaster is like the whole company is up. Woohoo, we're all excited, and then the whole company's down when you're small. When you're big, it's like this team is really excited, and then you look at that team, it's like, oh crap, everything's crashing. Mm-hmm. So it's always the roller coaster. Maybe the frequency change or the amplitude changes, but the frequency doesn't seem to change.
I love the analogy, though. I mean, I agree with you. I've been doing my business for a long time, and it's definitely a roller coaster. And as you get bigger, it kind of just it changes. But I've always felt like good entrepreneurs can make it through that roller coaster. They're kind of staying somewhere in the middle, even though everything is going up and down. That mentally and kind of emotionally, they can at least somewhat stay in that middle space and don't go crazy.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I like that idea of like staying in the middle space because it very much, especially at the early days, you feel like every single one, you're like one misstep away from it's all over kind of thing, which probably not untrue. I do think the biggest one here is like, it's going to happen. Tomorrow, it's also going to be a roller coaster, and next week it's going to be a roller coaster. I think even things like vacations, right? Like, okay, next week, do you want to take off? Like, the roller coaster is going to be there when you come back. It's going to exist whether you're there or not. Like, I'd like to think I have an effect on it, but it's not going away. Like, you're not going to, I'll just do this one last piece and then it will be solved. It's like, no, this piece will be solved for a small amount of time, but that piece over there that you weren't paying attention to while you solved this one, oops. But yeah, I think like you said, level setting is really important. And it does get easier as organizations scale. Not to mention, like I said, I mean, there are 30 other people at the company who have way more expertise in their areas than I do. It's like, great. I could sleep better at night knowing that that's what they're doing and I'm doing this part. Like, terrific.
Someone else can firefight that fire.
Exactly. When you're much smaller, you are definitely fighting all of them.
No, I agree. How have you? Is there any way that you've, I guess, manage people through that roller coaster? I always, when I talk to founders, it's like they're going through the ups and downs, but that means their team is too. And, of course we want to hire people in startups that like a little bit of the roller coaster because they don't want the day to day, but still you got to somewhat manage your team through the craziness as well. Have you had to do that, or any insights on how you do that?
I do think, well, maybe to flip the question a little, what I think is really kind of fascinating, and again, we're not that big of a company, right? But as we've sort of matured and grown, at the very early days, I think almost every single person, I have to really go through the list, but I think every single person for the first at least few years, you'd ask them hey, what don't ask them the boring question, what's your 5-year plan? But if you ask them something along that line, right? It's well, I want to do my own startup, or I love it's very much they want that experience, exposure. They're interested in sort of the journey part of it, right? They're in it for somewhat the roller coaster, and they're learning how to adapt to it if they don't already have experience in it, of this is what it's like every single day. And for the most part, they're thrilled about it, right? It's always kind of exciting to try that for the first time. As you said, level setting, the endurance problem of try to do this for 10 years. I think as you sort of step through that maturity progression, you start moving from kind of that of, I want to do startups, to more the professional, this is what I do in life. This is my role, right? The startup thing is just kind of, oh yeah, that's neat. We're a little smaller and scrappier, but it's not, what do you want to do if we made a big exit? It's I'm going to start my own company. That's not the answer anymore, which is great, right? Because that means you're starting to get kind of diversities of opinion around the table, as you're oh, well, you've been doing this role for 10 years. So you definitely know how to answer this question. I think that managing question that you're asking really evolves in each of those phases around sort of how to manage that roller coaster. Just different kinds of people in each one.
Yeah, and just to kind of follow up on the roller coaster piece, is with COVID, how did that affect you? And then more so, how did you handle this big outside force that kind of came in and upset everything for everybody?
Yeah, that was less fun. That was definitely tough. I think it was tough for everyone because I think it was just massive, massive uncertainty. I still remember we had come up with if the governor closed the Pennsylvania, or no, it was if the city closed their schools, we would close our office. And I left on a Friday afternoon, and then and then Governor Wolf of Pennsylvania actually closed all schools across the state. And it was okay, everyone got on Slack immediately and was I guess we're not coming to the office on Monday. Happily, we had a little bit of time to sort of prep for remote work, but yeah, not easy. Certainly not something I hope anyone else ever has to take a lesson from this and do again in a few years. Hopefully it's just, that's not a thing. But I do think the kind of adversity, scrambling, etc., those concepts are roughly the same. This one just had the particular character of actually potentially harming everyone involved. That part was pretty devastating. But I think when we do our jobs right, kind of as entrepreneurs or something, whatever you want to call that, people are ready for the craziness, right? The most hectic things you can imagine, the scrambling, the sort of getting ready. We don't have a lot of rigid systems. That's probably a con in some ways, but it's also a big pro when it comes to perturbations and things that really shake us up. So yeah, not fun, but I'm glad that we're sort of still holding on and we're able to kind of get through on the other side, or hopefully we're on the other side, without too much sort of tumult.
That's great. So Ben, I would like to get just your take on where do you see the business going in the next 12 years, kind of what's on the horizon, And now what's the 3-year path? What does that look like?
I like it. Did you say 12 years initially? That's awesome.
No, I said 12 months.
Oh, okay.
I was saying 12 years too. I was like, man, Tony, you are really looking out.
Wow. All right. Wow. This is going to take a lot of imagination. All right, 12 years from now. Okay. Wait, shit. How old am I?
I'm with you, Ben.
12 months, kind of 3 years. I mean, this seems boring, but I think growth will be certainly a big part of it. I think as I said, we're definitely on the venture capital roller coaster, or rocket ship, whichever you want to call it. So my guess is, I think all expectations are, somewhere by the end of next year, we'll be looking for sort of like our next raise. That'll put us into a totally new sort of stratosphere of capability, development capability, right? We can really start to supplement a lot of our product development. What I think is the most exciting is that, well, you look at kind of like what's happening in Washington. This is very specific to our business. All the infrastructure discussion, I think there's the funding part of it, but then there's just the fact that, like, you talk to anybody and they know about, like, oh yeah, infrastructure. Like, it's becoming a something that we're all paying attention to. And I think is creating this really great tailwind within the infrastructure, construction, this built world kind of environment. That I think for the next several years, we're going to be able to really ride that into some bigger success in certainly sales numbers, et cetera. But like, I think we can make some massive strides on product development, sort of simplifying how managing infrastructure works. And ultimately, I think the big takeaway would be, it is painful to know that, this is the world we work in, and yet it's like, America's infrastructure is crumbling, right? That's the usual refrain. We're going to solve that by doing better maintenance and management. And we're not going to do that by just kind of like throwing money at it and hoping it happens, right? It will be technology that figures out how to do that bigger, better, faster. So I'm really excited that, what we're building, what we've been building, is just kind of like ideally suited for that problem. So it'll be on us to make sure that we can weave that path and really take advantage of what the opportunity looks like. So I'm excited. I think really we have a chance to make a big, big impact here.
Yeah, no, that is exciting, and a good point that you guys probably will have that tailwind because of the spotlight on infrastructure, and yeah, exciting times.
Yep. Very cool.
So one thing we didn't talk about, and just real quickly, are there a lot of competitors in the space, and how do you look at competition? Do you pay a lot of attention and worry about it, or just say, this is our path and we're going to stay focused on it?
Well, there are sort of like a few other kind of adjacent to us. I think there are some doing kind of close or close-ish, but not sort of direct, toe-to-toe competitors. But I think to your kind of last part of the question, don't necessarily look, right? I think, again, come back to that idea of like, we just need to solve a problem. There are a lot of problems out there. They might solve one version of it. We might solve the other, and that's fine. And my philosophy is always, we are going to determine whether or not we win. We're going to determine whether we get the product market fit, whether we can get the right sales proposition. It's not going to be, some competitor comes and eats our lunch. Like, unlikely. We're basically going to win or lose on our own ability to execute.
Well, Ben, before we dive into probably our last question here in a second, tell us where, for the viewers, where they can learn more about RoadBotics, follow what you guys are doing, see what you're up to.
Absolutely. So I'm very active on like social media, our RoadBotics' accounts and things. We talk a lot about kind of our research and the new technology. But if there are any people out there that are sort of in that civil engineering, in the government space, kind of infrastructure, roadbotics.com. That's the easiest way to find out about us. But everybody knows somebody in government. That's usually how it works. And point them our way. We're going to help.
Awesome. So just a final question that I ask everybody, I'm really interested in, if you were able to go back in time to before you started the company and have coffee with yourself, what advice would you give?
Oh man, how many minutes do I have to tell myself about the future?
Yeah, right. The almanac.
Yeah, well, the boring answers would be the things that we discovered are the right product market fits, but that feels almost like cheating. I would probably actually, if I could go back in time, I would tell myself to take it slow, less chaos. Just, I think what you're talking about, kind of the level setting. That to me is the absolute biggest one. I think it's probably the best lesson that I've learned over the last several years here at RoadBotics is, take it slow. Tomorrow's going to be chaos too.
Yeah.
But the worst thing you can do is make stupid decisions. Just, keep on trucking.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, well, very good. Well, everybody, thanks again. Dr. Benjamin Schmidt from RoadBotics. Thank you for your time, Ben. We really appreciate it. To our viewers, we'll be back again next time. Next week with another exciting, interesting founder doing amazing things. And we will see you then. Take care, everybody.
See you. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.